The story of Joseph in Genesis is obviously full of a lot of drama and a lot of heart-wrenching pathos. It's just full of a lot of ups and downs and tears of joy and sadness of just the most dizzying heights and the just gut-wrenching lows. And yet it's not only for Joseph. We could find a lot of our own experiences in his very extreme story, even if we haven't been through the exact thing that Joseph and his family went through. We've all, to some extent, experienced betrayal. We've all experienced disappointment or dreams that didn't make sense, that didn't seem like they were coming to pass. But what I want to focus on here today is something that we all have or will experience at some point, and that is grief. Now, the Bible says that Jacob grieved so deeply for Joseph that he was pretty much stuck in his grief. And he was refusing to move on until the whole issue of the famine sort of shook him awake, because then he realized, I have to make a plan. We've heard that there's grain in Egypt. I've got to make a plan to get my boys down there to get food. And then, unbeknownst to him, Joseph was over there as the prime minister testing his brothers, and that landed his son Simeon in prison. And then they brought back word to Jacob that Joseph, in disguise, wanted Benjamin, the youngest son that Jacob had been holding on to for dear life. Joseph wanted him to come to Egypt. So Jacob was caught in this web of these circumstances that he felt like were terribly unfair. He felt like he was being picked on. And here's what I want to address about this, because all of us have been there at some point, or we will be. Where have you ever been in a situation where you feel like this is a blow that you will never get over? That's what losing Joseph did to Jacob. He felt like this is one thing I will never understand. God can never make it better. I will never get over it. And his whole family suffered because of that. And then a famine hit his family and shook him awake. And it took another crisis and seemingly very unfair circumstances to wake him up. And his sons had to confront him and basically say, look, Dad, we are being painted into a corner here. We need to get grain from Egypt. Otherwise, we're going to die. And this prime minister seems to be making all of these unreasonable demands, but we have to comply. Otherwise, we're going to die anyway. And Jacob, in the Bible, his response indicates a lot of bitterness and weariness. And he's like, fine, take Benjamin. He's like, and if I am bereaved of my children, I'm bereaved. He's like, God has taken away my children. And, he was just in so much despair. And you can imagine at that point in time, it felt like he was being picked on. Like, haven't I been through enough? And now I have to go through this rigmarole with this prime minister of Egypt who's trying to make life hard on me, and is using the fact that I need food to hold my sons hostage. And yet in the midst of all of this, God had gone ahead of everyone to save Israel from famine. And he had taken the boy that the brothers had rejected and that Jacob had thought was dead all those years and made him the prime minister of Egypt. So Joseph was actually the reason for their salvation from death at this famine. And Jacob even had to deal with that when the brothers came back home and told him the truth and told him Joseph is alive and he wants you to come to Egypt. Jacob even had to put up with that. All of a sudden, in his old age, he was having to cope with the fact that his sons had lied to him all those years. And now he had to go uproot everything and move to a foreign land to see his son again. And he had to accept the fact that his son had been assimilated into a different culture. And even though, Joseph was still honoring God, Jacob went through a lot of blows in his life. But the encouragement that I want to give you is from the moment when Jacob is on the way to Egypt and God meets him again for the first time in years, decades, and reminds him, I am God, El Shaddai, and I am going to take you down to Egypt, and Joseph's hand will close your eyes. Joseph's going to be with you when you die, and I will bring Israel up out of Egypt again, so don't be afraid. God met him in all of that, and all that time that he thought God was picking on him, all that time that he thought his life had been a despairing waste, all that time that he wasted in grief, God was working. And Jacob didn't even know it. He thought that God had just forsaken his whole family, and yet God was working on something that was so epic that we make movies about it. This story is so epic, only God could have come up with it. And the father who benefited from all of this, whose son was at the head of all of this, was the one who thought that God had forsaken him. So take that as encouragement as you are going through your own unfair season and it feels like just blow after blow is hitting you and you can't get back up and you feel like, are all those promises God had for me just moot at this point? You know, like, did I do something wrong? Did I make a mistake trusting God? No, he is working. And even if he doesn't restore what you've lost in the way that you want him to, there will be restoration and redemption because that is who he is. At the very least, you always have this option, and it's always the right option, to remember El Shaddai, to remember the God of the universe, who still is and always will be at the helm, completely sufficient.